women blessed the bright sun after so many winter days of gloom. Nobody thought about an avalanche. What could cause trouble on a day the Lord had given them? Maybe the cause was an animal, a deer or an elk, or even a mountain sheep, making its way along the ridge of Jubilee Mountain. The weight of the beast would have been enough to loosen the snow. That happened often enough. Nobody saw an animal, but then who was looking? Or worthless Dave Buck might have set off the avalanche. He'd put on snowshoes and taken his gun and gone high up to hunt for a deer. A fawn, really, for Dave was too lazy to cut up the bigger carcass and haul it home. The company forbade hunting around the mine, but Dave didn't care. He snowshoed up near Timberline, where he'd seen the footprints of deer. He didn't find any, and he stopped to drink from a pint he'd put into his pocket. One drink and another, and he sat down beside a stunted pine and picked off the cones and slid them down the white slope. Then he tossed the bottle into that cornice of snow that dipped out over a ridge. But perhaps it was nothing more than the spring melt. That storm a few days before had dumped 5 feet of snowfall on top of a dry, heavy base of winter-worn snow. The wind had driven the snow off ridges, leaving them barren, and piled it into large cornices high up. But now the day was cloudless, the sun shining down as harsh as if it had been midsummer. It was so bright that it hurt your eyes to see the glare on the white, and some of the miners rubbed charcoal under their eyes to cut the sharpness. But who cared what the cause was? Something started the slide that roared down Jubilee Mountain in Swandyke, Colorado, and that was all that mattered. There was a sharp crack like the sound of distant thunder, and then the cornice of snow where Dave Buck had thrown his bottle, a crusted strip 200 feet long that flared out over the mountain ridge, fractured and fell. It landed on layers of snow that covered the mountain slope to a depth of more than 6 feet. A heavy, wet, melting mass of new snow on top, falling on frozen layers of snowpack that lay on a bed of crumbled ice. The bottommost layer, a mass of loose ice crystals, formed by freezing and thawing, lubricated the acres of snow lying on top of it, just as much as if the bed had been made of marbles, and sent the snow careening down the mountain. The miners called such a phenomenon a slab avalanche, because a curtain of snow slid down the slope, picking up speed at a terrible rate until it reached 100 miles an hour. Nothing stood in the way of the terrifying slide because the mountainside was bare of trees. They'd been torn out 40 years earlier, in the second wave of mining that came after the prospectors abandoned gold pans and sluice boxes. Men had trained giant hoses on the mountain, washing dirt down the slope to be processed for precious minerals. Hydraulic mining, as it was called, also rid the mountainside of rocks and trees and underbrush that would have interfered with an avalanche. Not that anything could have held back the tons of white that slid down Jubilee Mountain that afternoon. The slide would have taken anything in its path. This wasn't the first slide on Jubilee Mountain. The hillside, in fact, was known for avalanches. But it was the worst, and it spilled over into the forest at the edge of the open slope, tearing out small trees by their roots and hurling them into the rushing snow, which turned them into battering rams. A cabin that perched under the pines was wrenched from its foundation, its log walls torn asunder and broken into jackstraws. The slide rushed onward, churning up chunks of ice the size of boxcars, gathering up abandoned hoses and machinery and the other detritus of mining that lay in its path. It hurtled on, thrashing its deadly cargo about, not slowing when it reached the bottom of the mountain, but instead rushing across the road, filling the gully with snow as heavy as wet cement and flattening the willows. The avalanche hurtled on.